Hello, everyone. Welcome to MGG Live. We've got another great topic today. We're going to be talking about what counts as retro. Obviously, that's a moving target. We were supposed to have two guests today. One is not here yet. Hopefully, he shows up. I've messaged him. But we do have the great Dr. Scott from Game Closet.
Hello.
We were
Glad to be
also
here.
supposed to have Brian's Man Cave, who did a video on this last year. But he is MIA at the moment. So Scott and I are gonna handle this. And I was telling Scott in the green room that both he and I are talkers, so I don't think we're gonna have a problem filling an hour.
I don't think so. Not at all.
This is so last week on the podcast, what I did is I tier ranked all all main home video game consoles from the first generation all the way up to basically today. And it's probably the most fun I have ever had doing a tier ranking, because I was like fighting with the chat and they were getting mad at me, and it ended up being some give and take. And I would put like ColecoVision at A, and some people would cheer and some people would boo, and then I'd move it down to B, and then that would reverse. And um, just a reminder to everybody, I did mention it in that podcast, and even you, Scott, as a content creator, that tier ranking list I've saved and is in the description link of last week's podcast.
Okay.
Absolutely do it, man. It's so much fun. And if you can do it live, that's even better. Just tag me so I can watch it.
Yeah, I can see people out in front of my house burning me in effigy. That'd be great.
Yes. Yeah. So and here's the thing. So the original Magnavox Odyssey, I put at an A tier. I couldn't bring myself to put it in an S, but the reason I put it, like, the console itself kind of sucks, but it started the game. It was the first ever video game console, right? So I'm like, okay, just by default, that should be A tier.
Yeah, you kind of have to give it a break just because it was the first.
But to this gentleman's point, it made the rest of the ranking more difficult. I should have ranked it last, because it's like, do I put this at A or yeah? But it
Yeah.
was a lot of fun to do. Hello, OG Hugo. Hello, Zenbloke. Howdy, Texas. Howdy, Georgia. Welcome, everybody. So, what qualifies as retro? This is obviously, like I said, it's a moving target, and depending on your age, the answers are very, very different. So the purpose of this podcast will kind of be to talk through it. Like, I know what I consider retro, and I imagine it's probably awfully similar to what you consider retro. We're close to the same age, I think. But like what my parents would consider retro, what my grandparents would consider retro would be very different.
Well, there's a difference between retro and the oldies.
Well, and we're going to talk about that too, because I was thinking about that. But why don't you start us off? What are your thoughts on retro? What qualifies?
I kind of have two rules of thumb, or if you watch Boondock Saints, two rules of wrist on it. Because I believe the general definition that a lot of people adopt, just a broad stroke,
Mhm.
is anything that is 20 years old and over. So it's like once it's hit its 20th birthday, it's retro. But even though I do use that for general criteria, I don't feel that that's retro to me. I think it has to be a little closer to about 30 years old. So
Okay.
if you're looking at the NES, the Genesis, the Super Nintendo, that era right in there, that's when things are, and those are retro. The 32X, the Sega CD, and you might even toss in Sega Saturn just because it was so close there.
Yeah.
95, 96, whatever year that was. So I mean, once things are starting to get the walker out, then yeah, it's retro. So, but the Xbox 360, the Wii, the PS3, are they
Yeah.
really retro? Not
Well, my kids would
really,
tell you yes.
but they are. So yeah, but yeah, kids, yeah, because that's an old game. It's like, well,
Well, my kids don't look at it that way, but like I've always thought, so from a personal perspective, I think most people are going to look back and consider anything before they were an adult to be retro. And so for me, like the last video
yeah,
game system I bought, like I had and played not as an adult, granted I was an older teenager, was the Nintendo 64. And so for me that would be like kind of a, it came out in 96, so almost that 30-year mark, right?
yeah,
Um but because in the following generation, I bought my first house, I got married, I had my first kid. Um I wasn't a kid anymore, and so I don't feel nostalgic for that. And so while that might come, line up pretty well with like that 30 years, 20 years from now, I'm still going to say, no, Nintendo 64 is where retro ends,
right.
because that's my personal view of it, right?
Well, if I'm going to throw nostalgia into the mix, then I mean pure nostalgia, because
Hmm.
I think sometimes you can get kind of like, oh, that was cool, and I remember that when I was younger ish teen, but that warm fuzzy wrap yourself up in a blanket kind of nostalgia. Then I'm going to go further back,
Yeah.
personally, um, because a friend of mine did tell me this, and I happen to agree, and I won't go into the extreme details, but he once said, nostalgia is a liar.
Oh, it totally is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's any kind of scientific
Yeah.
metric.
And yeah, because nostalgia definitely sometimes puts the rose-colored glasses on you, or the beer goggles, if you will, and makes you go, "Oh, that's cooler than what it really was." It was cool then because it might have been the hip, the cool, the awesome, the most advanced thing at the time, or mom and dad got it for you for Christmas, best Christmas ever, best birthday ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, when once you enter nostalgia into it, then the cards that I just laid down a couple minutes ago, those all come back up, and then now I'm looking at Atari, ColecoVision.
Yeah,
That's
like
that sort of a thing.
the true nostalgia for me would be Atari, uh, NES, and probably SNES. I was entering my teens during the Super Nintendo stuff, but that's when it was like you go to your friend's house and you play video games, as
Yeah.
opposed to Nintendo 64 was just you playing, well, on original PlayStation. Um, and then there's the other thing. So if we look, I mean, you could almost, like, retro obviously means retroactive. So technically, anything that's no longer current is retro. But like in the 90s, we didn't consider the 80s retro. That was
No.
just, and I remember again being in high school in the 90s. I remember being embarrassed about the 80s. Like the 80s just sucked because whatever, whatever, whatever. Then as you get older, you're like, no, the 80s were bloody well awesome. We had Queen, we had AC/DC, we had Guns N' Roses, we had
Van Halen.
Atari.
Woo!
Yeah, all that stuff. Um, but in the immediate thing, because I remember in high school, we had a retro talent competition, and all the different uh, acts in it were from like the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And that was so, but the equivalent now would be acts from like the 80s and 90s. I remember my kids had, well, one of my kids in elementary school had like a retro day at school, and everyone was dressing up like the 80s. None of them were alive anywhere near the 80s, but that was with their retro day, and yet that talent competition, and I'm inviting lots of, especially now that Mr. Postow's in the chat, I'm inviting lots of teasing about this. I won it with Elvis.
Okay.
Um, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I sang Heartbreak Hotel, and And nothing made girls feisty and frisky like Elvis in the 90s. But it was so perspective, to take perspective out of it is such a huge thing, because right now, and it's not like retro, it has to be current enough that it's in the popular zeitgeist. Like if you're talking about fashion, right? Um Retro right now, like if you dress up like you're in the 80s or in the 70s,
Yeah.
people would say, "Oh, you're dressing retro." If you dress up like you're from like 1910, that's now vintage.
Mm-hmm.
If you dress up like you're 1863, that's reenacting. And if you dress up like you're from 1,000 years ago, that's cosplay, right? Like there's a sweet spot for retro. I'm just going to bring up Poe's comment here. It's a question that can't be answered to suit everyone's definition of what retro means. Different age groups have a different idea of what retro gaming means, and that's exactly true. That's kind of what we're saying here. But the real answer is whatever isn't current, albeit as a blanket answer. I think it still has to be. Um, it, we are not talking about the Switch at all, Jeremiah. You're all right here.
Absolutely not. No.
Although I will say, we were talking in our Discord about the Retro Bliss Rewind podcast, and Retro Bliss just recently got a Switch, and he's like, "I'm loving this thing. We should do an episode on the Switch." And my first thought was, "Oh, he's gonna get eaten alive by Jeremiah." And hey, look who we've got! Brian's Man Cave.
There he is.
Man,
Fashionably late.
my computer is just like completely crap right now.
Really?
It's taking forever to do anything. Just to open up a window, open up this. I had to get into Facebook to get the link, and it just was taking forever, loading screens, and just crazy.
We're glad you made it. You only missed 12 minutes. You're good.
Well, let's go all the way back to the beginning, and we'll
start
everything we did.
We've kind of already just talked a little bit about how retro is a very personal thing. So how do you quantify it? Like my kids would feel nostalgic and retro for the Wii. I feel we here probably feel nostalgic and retro for the Atari 2600, the NES, the Intellivision, and my grandparents feel retro before television was around. If you ask my grandfather what counts as retro, he'd say stuff from the 30s and the 40s.
World War II.
Yeah. Hitler's retro. Yeah. Oh, we're on YouTube. I'm not allowed to even say that name, am I?
Oops.
But we can say Mr. Hilter because we all have watched Monty Python.
Yes, we have. So what are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, well, it's always an interesting topic. I mean, and I'm starting to see it with the younger generation that I talk to today. I see it even on Twitter and stuff like that, or X or whatever it's called. People are like, "Oh, I'm nostalgic for like the PlayStation 2," and I'm like, "Really?"
Which has started to come in. I noticed people talking about retro games and doing reviews of like PS2 games. To
PS2,
me, that's
PS3.
insane.
That's retro gaming to some people. I'm like, wow, that's modern to me. That's way modern.
Well, it's very interesting that you bring that up because in less than 2 weeks, I'll be at, and I don't know what the anagram stands for right off the top of my head, but I'll be at CCAG. Generally it's a gaming swap meet in North Olmsted, Ohio. I have a table. I'm selling some of the gaming stuff that I don't need anymore, or that I have duplicates of, or whatever. And as I'm going through my PS2 stuff, I'm sitting there going, I'm like, there are things that are absolutely 100% untouchable. I was like, no, I have that game is sentimental. My boys and I played that when they were kids. That game, we're not touching that, that sort of thing. If it's something that's just sitting there on the shelf, or if I've beat it and I don't care about it, or I bought it the last couple of years, I don't have nostalgia for it. It's not sentimental to me. So bye-bye.
Yeah.
So, into the box it went, and that's it. So, I mean, sentimentality does come into it too, because like you mentioned, the Wii, I remember my sons opening up the Wii on Christmas morning when they were, I don't know, like 6 and 9 or something like that.
Yeah.
and just tearing into it and losing their absolute minds. So to me, that's a very sentimental thing. And I have their Wii in its box in my closet right here in the game closet. So, and it's like, oh, why don't you sell the Wii? You got the Wii U. I'm like, nope, no, I can't do that. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I remember getting when I got the Switch, and then I took, because I had the Wii set up to our primary TV, the big flat screen TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I got the Switch, I'm like, okay, well, I don't need the Wii anymore, so I packed it up into a box, put it in the basement. I don't have any kind of like attachment to it. Like when I got the Wii, my daughter was like 2 years old, maybe 1, 2. I got it because I thought it was cool, and it's like, honestly, I had a hard time finding games I liked on it. So I think I bought into the whole sports thing, the bowling and the being able to do the interactive stuff. That was different to me. And then after that, I was just like, I struggled to find anything. Like, I would go to the game shop or whatever, the electronics boutique, wherever the stores were, and go through and look at all the Wii games and be like, ugh. I ended up buying like Impossible Mission for the Wii.
Okay.
Because that's a game that is, resonates with me in my childhood. I played it a lot on the Commodore 64, played it to death. I know how to beat it every time I play it. And so I'm like, I had to have it. But as I was playing it on the Wii, I'm like, wow, the controller really sucks for this game. It doesn't work. I don't have any other fancier controllers. So
yeah, kind of Nintendo 64 on. Nintendo built their controllers like for specific games. I think like the two Mario Galaxy games on the Wii are amazing. They're some of my favorite Mario games of all time. So there is a kind of a golden core, but you're right. Like the third party stuff was kind of all over the place. There was some good stuff, but most of it was like party game, mini game compilations. But my kids ate that crap up.
Mm-hmm.
They loved it. The Rayman Raving Rabbids.
Man, oh my gosh!
That to them, that's their equivalent of me saying I had my friends over to play Warlords.
Absolutely.
Or Video Olympics, as Jeremiah Thomas is about to scream in the chat.
And I still don't understand Minecraft. I don't know anything about it. I still don't get it.
I resisted it for so long. And then my kids finally convinced me. We've got a world on the Wii U that's been going for 8 years. It has a subway system. It has roadways, cities, everything. And I actually found myself in a position where, like, I wouldn't have my kids, because they're a week with me and a week with their mom. And I'd be like, I kind of want to play some Minecraft, but it's a joint world. I feel dirty going on there and doing that.
I bought Minecraft for my 6, almost 7-year-old daughter this past weekend. And I have it for the 360, but it's not something we would turn on. But I was like, well, I'll get it for you for the Switch. And then now she's just like, if we're in the car or whatever, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And my boys like to play it, and I would goof around with it with them, but I have no interest to turn it on myself. It's not my thing. Yeah. My joke and my snide joke back in the day when mine first came out, I said, I've played Nintendo 64. I don't need to play this.
And Jeremiah Thomas, a 7-year-old who must be sitting with them, just popped her head up. Is like, did they say Minecraft?
Minecraft.
But and you know what? Minecraft's been around since what, 2010?
Yeah,
that's a 15-year-old game now.
That's
yeah, and that, like, it's kind of what we've been talking about, where it's perspective. Like my kids, like when my kids are my age, Minecraft will be retro and nostalgic for them. The Wii, honestly, at least for my youngest, the Switch will probably be retro for them. PlayStation, like I've got the PlayStation 5 and I've got the Xbox One X. Really, my middle son's the only one that plays that, and he's 16 now, so I don't know if he'll consider that retro, but certainly like the Wii.
And that's the big question. When they're calling their games retro, what are we calling our games?
Vintage.
Antique?
Yeah, antique. Well, and that's actually something that I had brought up actually just before you hopped on. It's like, if you're talking fashion, I'll just kind of reiterate this one. Like if you're dressing up like you're from the 70s or 80s, that's retro. If you're dressing up from the early 1900s, that's vintage. 200 years ago, that's reenacting, and 1,000 years ago, well, that's cosplay now, right? So at what point is like the Magnavox Odyssey no longer going to be retro and be considered vintage? Is it there already? Magnavox Odyssey is 53 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
I like to look at it too with music. Like I think about when I was a kid, I would listen to my dad's music, and we would call that the oldies. And it was like Buddy Holly, stuff like that. Roy Orbison, the oldies. And that was in the 80s, talking about the 50s. Now we're talking about today. What's the oldies? Is the oldies now Nirvana? Is that the oldie? Metallica? Are they the oldies?
You consider we were born closer to World War II than to today. Right? Yeah. So it's the oldie, like you tune into an oldies station right now, it is 90s music.
Yeah, it's 80s and 90s music. And because I grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland, and there was a station still there, and the oldie station played stuff from the 50s and the 60s.
Yep.
And
it's always what my dad had tuned in the car.
Yeah. And then here 10 years ago, I'm like, they're playing 80s stuff. Oh.
Yeah, I remember asking.
But they've been playing 80s stuff on oldies station for a while. I remember like 10 years ago they were playing 80s stuff on oldies station.
I remember asking my mom though about it, and because she said she was in the car playing the music of her days, and her grandkids were there, and they didn't know the music, and I said, yeah, well, what do you call that now? And she's like, oh, I think we just call it boomer music. I'm like, oh, that makes sense then. Boomer music.
But we're not boomers.
No, we're Gen Xers.
that was the thing, is this station played like, the 50s and early, or the 50s and 60s, but the classic rock station played everything that was like 60s, 70s. So
Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Jeremiah's right here. Most oldies stations have dropped that oldies branding, because I remember it used to like sit with my dad. It's like, all your oldies were better, and now it's like, not that I listen to an oldies channel, but I tend to listen to channels that have a variety of areas. It's like all your stuff from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and today.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cleveland's classic rock. Like, what are you calling classic? Because I don't feel classic.
Yeah.
I'm classy, but I don't know if
Debatable.
Yeah, definitely.
Game Freak says they consider music 20 years or older classic now. Well, you think of a classic car. I always think of something from the 60s or something like that. But classic, like for me, I've got a 1950 Studebaker, and I have a 1992 Jeep YJ. And I just found out that my Jeep, it's a Jurassic Park Jeep, is considered a classic car. I can get the Hagerty insurance on that, save myself a lot of money. But I don't like that. That's not a classic car. You look at furniture. If it's 50 years or older, it's antique, which again means the Magnavox Odyssey and a lot of these pawn consoles would be considered antique if they were furniture.
Yeah, like when I had my DeLorean, that was classic, right? That was
yes.
I had
and I would say that the DeLorean, maybe just because of how it looks, I view it as a classic car. But like the Jeep's just a Jeep.
It was an 83, so
yeah. Well, it's like my 96 Olds Aurora, and I looked at my wife. Now I don't have the car anymore because I finally said, okay, it's time to just junk this thing. But there was a point in time where I said, if I wait one more year, I can get historic plates for it. And then when I told my best friend that, he goes, that lemon? And I go, that lemon is a historic car now. So
a 96.
A 96. Wow. That's just and if you think like during the 90s, what was gaming at that? It was like Super Nintendo, right? Like 96.
Super Nintendo, Genesis, and I mean the 90s was a huge
GoldenEye was a big
game. We started
game.
the 90s with the Genesis, And we ended the 90s with the play. Well, actually, no. We ended the 90s with the Dreamcast, 9999. So that was a crazy decade. But I consider the 90s gaming to be, like you said, like Genesis, Super Nintendo, and like PS1, N64 kind of thing.
It was at that time when I remember when I got my N64 and I realized that the modern gaming is no longer for me. I couldn't.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't get anywhere in Super or what is it? Mario 64 and Zelda.
Really?
I had a hard time
That
getting
game
anywhere.
blew me away. I think you're a few years older than me. That might have been the difference.
I just maybe it's just me. I just cannot grasp the 3D environments. So even for the Switch, like when I bought my Switch, I had a choice: get the Mario Odyssey game or the Super Mario Wii U game that they made for it. And I took
the
that
new
one.
Super Mario Brothers one, yeah.
I took that one because it was a 2D. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm gonna be, but then I ended up buying the Zelda one anyways, and I didn't get very far in it. My daughter got far in it. I got to a point where I'm like, I am lost. I don't know where I am. I don't know what I'm doing. I give up. This is too much for my old brain. I can't do it. It can't process.
Is Oblivion on the 360 retro? I would not consider it so. But when did it come out? It was probably like late 2000s, right?
That's I'm gonna guess 2010, and I'm gonna look it up. He's Oblivion, right?
Oblivion, yeah. My kids would say yes. I would say no. My kind of bar.
March 20th, 2006.
Oh, okay.
I think we're thinking.
Wow, so that's almost 20 years old then.
Yes.
Yeah, 2006 actually. That's
Skyrim came out November 11th, 2011.
Yeah, I mean the number that I would land on, just because it kind of fits again, like and we were talking about this earlier, retro for me ends when I became an adult. That's a very personal definition. But that would be around 99, 2000. So retro ends with the Nintendo 64 for me. But and that fits very conveniently that I could say, 25 years. But 10 years from now, I'm still going to say retro ends with the Nintendo 64, and it'll be 35 years at that point.
But I think I could pretty much adopt that, but modify it a little bit for myself, because it's retro ends for me when I started buying the consoles myself. And I'm not talking about buying an Atari at a yard sale for $25 either. I'm talking like I went into the store and bought my first Genesis. Yeah, I mean that was my money from like a real job.
Yeah.
So my first Genesis, my Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I do. Same. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do still have nostalgia for some of those too, because from that era, the only one I still have that's my original console is the Super Nintendo, which is sitting right here under this pink gorilla. So
that's funny, because the Super Nintendo was the first console I bought for myself too. Yeah. Paper route money.
I remember buying that Super Nintendo, and I remember buying, I think it was Game Boy Advance. I bought myself. Everything else was always Christmas presents or Easter presents or whatever. They were always big purchases.
For sure. And Mr. Postal, because this isn't the Retro Blitz Rewind podcast, we can actually bring comments like this up. Mr. Postal says, Beat 'em and Eat 'em is retro pixelated porn where it all started. Good to know.
It's funny.
Okay, was Beat 'em and Eat 'em the first Mystique game?
Shall I look at?
Maybe we don't really care that much.
It's interesting that I never knew any of those games existed until way into my adulthood.
Me too.
I think I learned about them from the Angry Video Game Nerd. I watched his video and I'm like, what? There's porn.
I'm not sure where I learned about them. It might have been the AVGN, but I do remember going to the video store with my parents, and they'd have like the beaded curtain that had the one section kind of off, and everything was in like the brown beta or VHS cases. So if those were in there, it might have been Custer's Revenge. I don't know which one.
Debbie does
because
Debbie does
and then
Atari.
there are others which are basically just reskins of the same
Yeah.
3 games, but they were no longer Mystique at that point. They were something else. I've got Play something. I've got a bunch of them on my shelf back there.
Like a lot of those games were always under the counter type of games. Like you had to know they existed and ask for them.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have saw them on the shelf and be like, "Can I have that game?" Imagine your parents' disgust if you brought it home and then you didn't know what was going on, but your parents were like mortified.
Yeah, Mr. Postile learned it from a guy that had a puppy and candy in his panel van back in the 80s.
Got abducted and had to play porn Atari.
Check out this game, little boy.
The other way to potentially look at retro is, when did gaming become modern in its style? And I would argue it was with like the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2 and like, because you could argue the PlayStation 1, you could argue Nintendo 64, but like even the transformation during that generation from the start of it to the end of it was huge. Like it was really a generation where they were trying to figure things out. And then now, with the exception of worse graphics, a lot of PS2 games play not identical, but very similarly to how a PS5 game would play, for instance. And so that could also be Nintendo 64 was the last one to use a cartridge, unless you count the little cards or handhelds, which we won't for the purposes of this. That was a big change in gaming. So then everything before that's retro, and everything after that is modern gaming. What do you guys think of that?
Well, yeah, once your games started showing up on CDs, things were changed. And even I remember buying the PlayStation, the first PlayStation, buying Tomb Raider, and realizing how much things have changed. And I tried to get into it, but I really just couldn't. It was hard for me. And if I look at a lot of the games that I have for the PlayStation and PlayStation 2, I ended up buying a lot of like the arcade classics. So it'd be like, 5 arcade games on there, like classic arcades like Frogger, Burger Time, like all the games I bought were always like classic games and 2D games. And I'm like, so what
like
the
the
hell
Activision collection and
the Intellivision collection. I'm like, so what's the point of this? But at the time when I was buying those, I didn't have like emulator on my computer or anything like that. So I mean, it made sense to me. I didn't have any other way to play those classic games because I didn't have arcades and I didn't have any other way. I mean, it wasn't until much later that I started to actually get emulators installed on my computer where I can play all these old games, or when these plug and play systems started popping up everywhere. So at the time it made sense, but then I'm like, this is weird. I'm playing like 1980s games on this like new modern system.
Yeah.
So it was really weird.
That's actually how I first got into computer space and asteroids. And it was on my computer, and you open this thing and it looked like Vector and all that. And you'd play with your keyboard because, like you, I didn't really go to the arcades in the 80s until the late 80s. And this always really pisses off Retro Bliss, but my first experience with Pac-Man was the 2600 version. And I grew up liking it. That was all I knew as Pac-Man, right? A lot of different games. Like I experienced Space Invaders on the 2600 first. I experienced Asteroids and all that. And it's stuff that, going back now and play, I play them on the computer, and I've been able to play them in arcades since, but it's not part of my personal nostalgia. But I certainly consider them retro, which again separates that nostalgia from the retro.
Yeah, I remember that too. I wasn't old enough to go to the arcades when they were in their prime. Like the Pac-Mans, the Q-Birds, the Donkey Kongs. It was only like if we went to Chuck E. Cheese or something like that.
Yeah,
I didn't start going to the arcades until it was games like RoboCop and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and
Yeah, and even then, you went to Chuck E. Cheese, and back then it wasn't really that much of an arcade. You had like the
No.
whack-a-mole. You had it was a lot of like those ticket games,
Yeah.
as opposed to like sitting down and playing Space Invaders.
Well, they had more arcade games back then than the ticket games. Unlike today, where it's the opposite. They'll have maybe one arcade
Oh,
game.
really? I don't remember it that way, but I could
I
definitely
remember that there was a lot more arcade than the ticket games for sure.
Yeah. Now they have like a wall of skee ball. Skee ball, and
Now it's like a casino for kids.
yeah.
It's trying to win tickets.
Yeah, I'll just respond to Andy Author here. When we do the Retro Bliss Rewind podcast, Phil has a Discord, so he pings everybody on the Discord. I don't have Discord, so I don't ping. But if you click the little bell notification, YouTube will give you a notification when I'm live.
But speaking to something that Brian touched on a little while earlier, because when he was saying that, Mario 64, that's where he kind of said, yeah, that's not for me, that kind of thing. And in that era, when we started seeing more of like the Crash Bandicoot style, the 3D games, I think that there were some of them that I think there were a lot of people that decided that wasn't for them, especially if it had a more open type of world to it. And I think it doesn't have anything to do with saying that the games before that those people are used to are simplistic by any means. It just seems that the stuff past that is more or the stuff before that isn't simplistic, that it's more of a diversion. And it's also it does connect with that nostalgia. Like, this is where my happy thoughts are, if you want to, put it that way. This new thing isn't quite my thing. And I can connect with that in some ways, because especially with the Nintendo 64, I didn't really care for some of those games other than Mario 64, because to me, they felt all the same. Zelda Ocarina of Time, I know I'm going to get crucified. I played halfway through it, and I was kind of like, and then once Majora's Mask came along, I said, this stinks. It's the same game. It's just, it's just
exact same game, like exact same engine, just reskinned. I feel the same way. Yeah, and I don't think in this chat I would be, but I would be in certain circles. I felt the same way about like all the Modern Warfare, Call of Duty games. Like, they're all just identical to me.
Eventually, it got that way for me too with Call of Duty. Yeah,
but I will say, and Tolbat here says Mario 64 is retro 3D. I don't think Brian would disagree. He's just saying that that's where he kind of like dropped off. It's like, this isn't for me. I remember, like, my dad is a huge James Bond fan. I knew James Bond before I knew Santa Claus. And so he bought us at like day one, he bought us GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. And he wanted to play it with us. So I put a little rumble pack in his controller. And as soon like he got shot once, the controller rumbled, he dropped it and said, I can't do this. Like, it's just it's because, and he was a big gamer. It was his Atari 2600 that I played with in the 80s, right? And just video games had moved past him. Wave Race, on the other hand, it looks like such a generic title. One of the best wave racing games to date. I love Wave Race.
I agree.
Really good.
Yeah, and I forget the name of the one that it was on GameCube after that. What was that? Was that Wave Race?
Oh, Blue Wave or something like that. It was Wave Race 2. Yeah. It wasn't as good.
It wasn't as good. I mean, it was prettier in some respects, but it just it felt slower, actually. So give me Hydro Thunder, give me Wave Race 64 any day.
Both my dad and myself, it's Sean Connery. Any other answer is wrong. Full stop.
But I think that also our generation, because we went through a whole evolution of video gaming, like we literally started with this square is my character to, a little bit better, more recognizable character to, even just looking at Super Mario Brothers, like we went from Mario Brothers to Super Mario Brothers, and to see the differences in look how different the first one is to the second one to the third one to Super Mario World. Like you see these transitions, you see it,
and the progression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I think like once PS3 came out, PS4, is there really that much difference in the look and feel and the play of the game on the next one and the next one and the next one after that, when the graphics are almost lifelike? Like it doesn't seem to me, like I look at some of these games like Call of Duty and all that stuff, I'm like, it looks like a movie to me. It doesn't even look like a video game anymore.
I would just like to say, and I totally agree. Like video gaming felt more like video games back then as opposed to today. Jeremiah and Thomas, I could fight you for an hour on this. On Her Majesty's Secret Service was absolutely one of the best Bond films.
Absolutely.
Roger Moore, and there are two types of Bond. Roger Moore and Pierce Brosnan are in the category of Bond that I've never been a big fan of. There's stuff in every Bond movie that I like. There is aspects of every character, every person who's played James Bond that I like. Roger Moore is like my probably second worst Bond.
But we'll touch on that just real quick though. But if you're watching For Your Eyes Only, that's when Moore was actually more like the Bond in the books, just like Timothy Dalton was. And the real gritty Bond. I mean, when he kicked the dove off the cliff, that was great.
That's the
it was, and he didn't, and he
Timothy
didn't
Dalton.
want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyhow, and so, yeah, like you were saying, like video gaming it's certainly evolved, and it is, like it's not to say it's a bad thing. Like video games now can be incredibly immersive. They've got stories. They're as good, if not better, than most movies now because you're in it and you're doing this stuff. But it's not like I caught myself doing this and I swore I would never do this. And it's not the same line that my dad used when I was a kid, but it's the same sentiment when the sentiment was really, I'm just old. But I remember telling my daughters, like when we were a kid, we had to use our imaginations when we were playing video games. Like you mentioned, right? With like Adventure, you show kids now the characters from Adventure, and they're like, okay, that's like 2 pixels. I don't know what the heck that is. Jeremiah, I will agree with you on that. I love Timothy Dalton.
I do too. I'm the only person in the world that hates Adventure. I know it. I know I am.
And
I don't. Here's the thing. I don't like Adventure. I don't. And that will piss off a lot of people. It's part of why I haven't done a mini review about it.
Yeah, it's a hot take.
But I respect it. I respect it. And it's certainly like, don't even use Adventure. Use any 2600 game, pretty much. You really had to use your imagination for what you were supposed to be playing as.
But I remember, like, I guess because we got conditioned to a lot of variances, especially in the later 80s. Like, I had a friend who had a VIC-20, and everything on there is very rudimentary. It's very like you're using ASCII characters for some of the things like that. And
especially the microcomputer stuff. Even
on the Commodore 64, I had a range of games from very simplistic graphics to very nice looking graphics. And then there was, I had a friend who had a ColecoVision, and then I had a friend who had an Atari 2600. I had a friend who had, so I got to see a range of graphics, and I kind of appreciated all of them. I was like, okay, this system has better looking graphics, looks more like the arcade, but this one has, very primitive looking graphics, but I still enjoy the game. And I think, just the range of it, even me growing up with the Intellivision, I got used to the Intellivision graphics. I thought they were great. I would see, the Intellivision, and then I'd go and see what the Atari could do. And I'd be like, well, it's lesser, but it's still fun. I think we just had this range of all these different systems could, produce different kinds of games, and we kind of love them all together. Whereas today, it just seems like everything is kind of looking the same. The Wii, the Switch, the this, that. Like a lot of the games are starting to look very close to every other system.
Exactly. Like there was a difference between a Master System and an NES. There was
Yeah,
a difference between a ColecoVision and a Intellivision, a Vectrex, an
TurboGrafx
Odyssey
16.
2, a
Yeah,
2600. And Mr. Posthouse saying, like, you're not really seeing the difference. You can buy it on Xbox, you can buy it on PlayStation, and
Yep.
they look identical.
and
Yeah.
now I remember the big fight between PS3 and 360, and the PS3 guys were like, well, in this grass field there are 400 blades of grass per square foot, and on the 360 it's only 250 blades. And like, it looks fine to me.
Who's counting?
It doesn't matter. I'm not counting grass in my game.
Yeah, a little bit of a difference, but I mean, it's a small difference. It's a small variance, and I think in this case, people just come down to brand now. They're just like, I'm an Xbox guy. I'm a Sony guy.
Well, now it comes down to which console. It's which console's UI do you like best, and which console's services do you like best? It doesn't have a whole lot to do with how how one game plays over another, or or it can come down to the very few exclusives that they do have. Now, look at Microsoft. They went out and they bought up every damn company out there, and they
then
have
closed half them down.
close half of them down. It's just like, okay, so you have all these IPs, but now you're not going to actually do anything with them. What's that all about? So you could actually have you could be producing the world's most wicked library and and probably even kill Nintendo at the same time, but no one's going to do it. They probably have it's probably between Microsoft right now and Atari, who has the keys to the retro gaming vault. Because Atari was just out there eating everybody up as well. So I don't know. It's kind of a crapshoot. I would really love to see Atari come out with something modern, something contemporary for today, and not like that piece of crap VCS they had a few years ago. And I would love to see Sega come out of nowhere and go, it doesn't have to be called the Dreamcast 2, but here's the Dreamcast 2. It's going to be on physical discs, and that's where we're keeping it. And I guarantee you, the retro lovers like us and the people who like physical would go, oh, heck yeah, I'm there. And then you would watch everybody else start to panic.
I disagree with what the result of that would be. Can I? So we've been talking about what counts as retro, and we've been talking about some nostalgia, and we talk about all of that. And I think in general we kind of agree somewhere between the 20 to 30 year mark is where it generally rests. But would you consider modern homebrew for these old consoles to be retro? So a new game for the Intellivision, like Brian programs games for the Intellivision. So would you consider your games retro, Brian?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I even think about it when it's a small thing, but when I release a video and say I do a video on my own game, like Napoleonic Wars.
Yep.
And I do a video, and then I tag it, and I'm looking at my tags, and I have retro in there, retro gaming.
Retro gaming. Yep.
And then I'm thinking about it. I always think about it. I'm like, but it's new. So
yeah, it's a new game for a retro system.
But it is retro because it's playing on an old system. Like it's
retro style for a retro system.
Yeah. And I've heard that before. Like retro doesn't necessarily mean it's necessarily old. It means it's mimicking something that's old. So unlike vintage, where vintage is actually old, retro is like, this phone is retro, that type of thing. Even though it was made 2 years ago, kind of idea, it's still retro because it's made retro. And so like a video game, if I'm making a game for the Intellivision, it's pretty much a retro game because you can't have a modern game on the Intellivision. It just wouldn't work. Like you can't have those kind of graphics. It just can't do it. So I think it's just, yeah, anything you make on the Intellivision today or Atari is going to be considered a retro game. It's a new game, but it's still retro. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I'm kind of on two sides of it. Like, obviously, I do the same thing when I'm like, obviously, my channel's dedicated to reviewing retro games, and a tag that I put in every single one of them is, hashtag retro gaming, hashtag retro game. And so they are, they're new games for old systems. So if a game is programmed and made to play for a retro console, is it a retro game or is it not? That is
No.
I've fought with myself over that, because
No,
it's still, I would consider it still retro gaming. It's not a retro game, but it's retro gaming.
Yes, it is retro gaming. I mean, just for example, when Champ Games comes out with like that, I don't remember what the name of it is, but that new version of Tutankhamun he came out with.
Tutankhamun Arcade.
Yeah, I mean that is a beautiful version of that, and and even when he does any port of an older game, it's a new version of it, but it's still retro gaming. But if somebody comes out with something brand new, like a lot of the stuff that I see on your channel, something brand new, it's retro gaming, but it's absolutely not a retro game. Yeah.
But wouldn't you feel weird calling it a modern game?
That I think is my big hang up.
It's not a modern game.
It's not a modern game.
It's a new game for retro consoles.
Yeah.
But it's not a modern game.
It's not a modern game.
But,
it's a retro
but then
game.
again, if you look at something like, I'm trying to think of something. What was that one that just came out? Oh, geez. I'm totally blanking. It's a side scroller, and they did it in Castlevania.
You mean like, you're not talking like Shovel Knight or something like that, are you?
It came out in the last year. I can't remember the name of it, and it's like a sequel to a game. I know I'm blanking, okay. But that is in the style of those 16-bit era type games. But it is of course a brand new game,
and I would say
it is a modern game then too.
I would say that is a modern game because it is programmed to play on a modern system.
On current systems. Yes.
When Champ Games does his stuff, when Brian does his stuff, when any of these retro programmers do their stuff, they're programming it in a way that a system from 1979 or 1977 can understand. Like, they're programming in BASIC, or not even in like machine code, or in a BASIC that is designed to generate machine code, because that's what these read. They're, you look at Shovel Knight and it looks like it could play on a Super Nintendo or a Genesis, but of course it couldn't. Not the least of which because of the audio. It's got like MP3 audio, right?
Yeah.
But also because of, like, despite the fact that it's that kind of 16-bit pixelated style, it's using more colors. It's using more, colors in certain spots. Brian could speak much better to this than I could, but you're very limited with how many colors you can have in a certain area of the screen.
Yeah. Well, for the Intellivision, you have like, you got to look at it as a grid of 8 by 8 squares, and in each 8 by 8 square, you can only have 2 colors. You have a background color and a foreground color, and then you're limited on which colors you're allowed. There's certain colors that are only able to be a background color and only able to be a foreground color, and you got to get creative with the white space essentially to draw the graphics. Like some of the drawings that you see on the Intellivision, that you can see how you got to really get creative with the negative space and using the 2 colors to make it work. It's a challenge, and whereas something on modern, there's no challenge. It's none. It's just like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are different challenges. You still have to program a game.
well,
But
yeah,
you're not dealing with the same limitations. So I would say that while playing like Police to or that's even a port. Operation Cloudfire, for instance, that is a new game for the Intellivision, new IP programmed by Oscar Kenneth. It's still retro gaming,
Right.
because you're still playing that, but you're playing Shovel Knight, which it's designed to look and play like a retro game, but it's not. That's modern gaming. That's not retro gaming.
Yeah, the name of the game that I was thinking of, because I have the game Dead Cells, but this one was called Dead Cells Return to Castlevania. Now, both are the same style, but I mean, because it has that Castlevania look to it, style to it, it is in Castlevania. Yeah, definitely, a modern game, a contemporary game, only playable on modern consoles, but definitely it looks like Nintendo 64. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, a
It's
Super
retro
Nintendo.
style gaming.
Yeah.
What about Andy Author's got a comment here? What about retro but collector's editions of like Holy Driver, Metal Storm, and now Undead Line coming out?
Yeah, Holy Diver. That rings a bell because I remember seeing it, but I'd have to look it up.
Or like for instance, Limited Run does like here's they re-released Worms Unlimited or Worms whatever, the one that was on the Nintendo 64. They do NES carts. They do games for old systems. Would you consider that to be the same? They publish them. They obviously don't program them.
Wouldn't that kind of fall into the same category as what Champ Games is doing then as well, and also Brian, because they're making something that's strictly for are those games playable on current consoles? Can you play it on the Switch? Do they release those games on the Switch? I don't know.
I think, I mean, they're emulated. You can play
it's emulated.
The fact that you can play them on an NES, I think, is what makes them.
Yeah, then it's emulated. Yeah,
and then it comes to the difference that Brian was pointing out, which is that it can be retro, but not vintage.
Yeah, that's a new game on a retro console then.
Yeah. So and by that, well, and here's the thing. So again, let's go back to the fashion thing. If I get my sewing machine out and I make myself a blazer that has massive shoulder pads and it looks like it belongs to the 80s, that's retro clothing. It's not vintage clothing, but it's retro clothing.
Well,
retro inspired.
It's interesting that you bring that up because now you see a lot of midriffs on girls and stuff like that, and that went away for a long time. You see, different things kind of fade in and out in fashion. So is it retro, or is it something that's borrowed from that style?
They do use the word retro often in these things. Like it has made a resurgence. I think retro has been a popular thing in the last few years now. A lot of clothing, and the fact that
retro inspired.
We're kind of bringing back physical media. Like my daughter, she's 15, and she wanted a record player. I'm like, what the hell? Like I didn't know people still would want that in today's world.
Let me dust this off from the basement. Yeah.
When they have like everything on their phone, I'm like, you want a record player? You want to play records? Like I stopped buying records when they were pretty much became obsolete at the point of CDs. And it's like, how the hell did they come back? Even tapes. I'm starting to see those come back. Cassette tapes. And
I'm well aware of the records thing, but like the vinyl and the vinyl collectors, I had no idea that cassette tapes were coming back.
Yeah, slowly but truly, they're coming back.
That has a lot to do, of course, with the first Guardians of the Galaxy. But the thing with vinyl, though, and I know this especially because a friend of mine, he's really into vinyl. I mean, look at all the vinyl I have up on the wall.
There is an analog quality to it.
There is that analog warm quality to it, but there are. And he showed me some things that just blew my mind about vinyl or record players, that there are audiophiles that you can buy like $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 record players out there. We're not even talking with the speakers. We're talking about the turntable itself, how it operates, how it produces the sound, how it sends it to the speakers. You know, we're talking really high, you know, high dollar stuff and very, very technical equipment that's for a, well, of course, a niche market, somebody who can definitely afford it. I believe it's Mise has some really awesome headphones out there. Like with a one pair, they'll cost you $5,000, but they're the Rolls Royce of headphones.
I get to work just fine in a Toyota.
Right. I mean, there's some that I've been meaning to buy for a long time, but they're $160, but they're the most comfortable pair you'll probably ever buy, and they cost $160. They're not $3,000, they're not $5,000, they're not $5,000.
Niche market was a good point there, and like to look at, like, say we're going back to like making new games for the Intellivision, right? That's a niche market.
Yep. Very.
Not a lot of people might look at it like even people our age might be like, oh, I remember having an Intellivision. They probably wouldn't mind buying one so they could play Astro Smash again, but would definitely not shell out the $70 to buy a homebrew. So it's interesting how you got these niche markets there. Like I also know like a friend of mine has a record collection, a huge record collection. He knows everything about records. I have old ones that I had when I was a kid. Like my brother just found some of my old records and he gave them to me like a week ago. And I'm like, oh wow, my Twisted Sister record, you know, like, and, you know, I forgot. I thought I'd never see this again. You know, things like that. But I would never go out and start buying new records, buy a record player, you know, get into that. It's not my thing. I'll stick with the modern. You know, I still play CDs in my car, you know, that kind of thing. Or
I love CDs, and I still have all my tapes from when I was much younger.
But then I realized too that that's a dying breed because like my car is a 2009 and has a CD player. We just bought a brand new car for my wife, a 2025. There's no way to play a CD in it. Like it's just it's a computer screen. Like you can't.
Yep. My car doesn't have a CD player either. You connect your phone.
The car I had previous to the car I have now still had a tape player. I could play my cassette tapes in it. And that was like a 90s Buick. So it just seems like, you know, it's as the times go on, and, you know, a lot of stuff starts becoming niche. And if you want to still, there's ways of playing retro games today without actually having the old hardware, doing it the old fashioned way. You know, people can emulate. You could, you know, download an emulator on your computer. So it's just interesting how things have shifted, and yet there's still some people out there willing to shell out money for
stuff like this.
Yeah.
Just to get that old feeling back.
In terms of our conclusions as a group here, what qualifies as retro? Anything that's between 20 and 30 years old and older when it comes to video games. And in terms of homebrew, it's not retro. They're not retro games, but they're retro gaming.
Retro gaming or retro inspired.
Yeah. And in terms of stuff like Shovel Knight, like retro inspired games for modern consoles, no, that's not retro gaming. Are we kind of agreed on that as our conclusions?
Yeah, that is retro inspired or retro styled.
One of my tests is to go to work and go to the fellow staff members who are in their 20s and ask them, do they know what this is? And they're like, no idea what you're talking about. It's retro.
Yeah, that's a good. Well, unless they're like my kids. My kids have played Vectrex. They've played Atari 2600. They know all this stuff.
They got a cool dad, then they'll know.
They have. Well, there's some adjective. I don't know if "cool" is the word, but there are definitely adjectives.
I remember bringing up Intellivision at work, and there was only one person who went, "Oh, I had one," and she was like around my age. Everybody else,
and it's funny. and this upsets some people, and you know I love the Intellivision. I love the Intellivision. I talk even to people my age and older, like retro gamers. They remember the 2600. They remember the ColecoVision. Only about 25% of them remember Intellivision.
Yeah.
Intellivision is like that.
If they didn't
Granted,
grow up with it, if they didn't have a friend that had one,
yeah,
no idea what it is.
and
Yeah.
See, I
granted,
remember
only
George-
only about 5% of them have ever heard of the Odyssey 2. So we got to win there. But
I
of
remember
those
George
three,
Clifton's commercials.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, definitely.
You're old.
Well, thank you very much, guys. This was a fun conversation. It went off the rails a little bit when I had to scold Jeremiah Thomas for saying Roger Moore was better than Sean Connery, but
you make that a whole new debate.
And if this wasn't a gaming channel, I would do a whole podcast just on James Bond. I could talk about James Bond for hours.
He's going to start his own James Bond channel next.
That's right, Mike's gaming. Mike's James Bond Gala. There you go. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you, everybody in the chat. And we'll see you next week on MGG Live. Later, guys.
Yeah.